All right, I want to cover two concepts this morning. And the first one is called Ruby modules and namespacing. And then the second one is going to be called object-oriented programming versus functional programming. I think people are starting to get to the point where it's kind of like, why am I doing stuff in classes? Why can't I just do everything in arrays and hashes? We'll talk about that this morning as well. To begin with, has anyone ever heard of a Ruby module? What is a Ruby module, John?
The way I saw it, it looked like it was just like a collection of classes.
Okay.
But it was like module at the top, and then it had multiple classes, and then there was something where you had to like call it like double colons. If you want to call the module, double colons the class, or something like that. But it just looked like it was a way to collect the classes to build some bigger like, group of things.
Okay, that is one way of describing it.
I used to one program. It was like a class, but all I had to do to use it was include module at the top of the page.
Yeah.
And then I could just run. It was just a list of dry functions that I could just run out of my other program.
Yeah, those two things are actually exactly it. So a Ruby module, the formal definition of a Ruby module is, quote, a grouping of objects under a single name. And that doesn't really mean anything to anybody. So let's just kind of take a look at what it looks like in real practice. So module, let's call this example module. All right, so there's two ways to use Ruby modules. The first one is for namespacing, the one that John talked about. This is basically when a module is used as a container for objects. So let's say you had a class called account. Account at this point has an initialize, it probably takes in some information, but account as a noun is pretty ambiguous, right? It could be a savings account, it could be a checking account, it could be a CD, it could be an IRA. What is account? It's just way too broad. So what we can do to make this a little bit better is we can say something called savings account, or we might have something called the checking account, just to make things a little bit more specific. So this is one way to tackle the problem of I have ambiguously named classes. I want to make everything as descriptive and as easy to read as possible. This is one way to make it a little bit better. Instead of just having an account, which takes so this could be one way. So this is one way to create an account. I have a general account class, and I pass in the type of account that it is. It could be a savings, checking, CD, all that kind of stuff. This kind of sucks. This is an ambiguously named class, so I want to make it a little bit more specific. So a way to make this a little bit better is down here. I have very specific class names that leave absolutely no room to the imagination in terms of how, in terms of what it is. This is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is creating, is called namespacing. And that's what John also talked about, where we have something like account, : savings. Or I have something like account, : checking. If I were to write, so it's basically saying it's an account. What kind of account is it? It's a savings account. Or when you were dealing with things like CSV, it's a CSV class, and specifically underneath it was a CSV row, right? We've seen CSV row like this over the past couple of days when you read and write from a CSV. Yes, no?
Yeah, I'm not tracking. I know when you return it, that'll sometimes come up in the
terminal. That's something that comes back up in the terminal. Yeah. Looks like CSV : row. You've at least seen this before, right? Yeah. This is basically a way that Ruby has had using a module and a class. So it's kind of like the CSV might be the module or the class, and then specifically underneath it is the row. Because I could have just a class row, but then it's ambiguous. What is row? That doesn't really apply to anything. So I want to attach it onto another class. So that's why I have CSV row. Similarly, when I have like an account or something like that, account is ambiguous, but when I say it's an account, specifically a savings account, then I'm being much more specific. And of course, you can do it this way, just say savings account, checking account. You could have had like a CSV row like this, but this is just another way of doing it. There's more than one right way of writing this out. So let's actually have an example here. So let's say if I was writing a class, I'm going to call it, let's say gravity. Force of gravity for the Earth is, anyone know what the force of gravity for the Earth is? 9.8. That's right. Yeah, it's 11th grade physics. 9.8 meters per second squared. So you have this class called gravity right here, right? And this will work in most contexts because we're here on Earth and gravity is a certain constant force here on Earth. But what if you wanted to have a different gravity for the moon or for Mars, right? If you wanted to do that, you could probably have Earth gravity, probably have Mars gravity and moon gravity, so on and so forth. The other way we could do it is having it like this. So I have a module called gravity, and then I'll have multiple classes nested within this module. So maybe I'll have a class called Earth. So let me just copy this up. Let's take too long. I have a module called gravity, and then I'll have a class called Earth, a class called Moon, a class called Mars, and each one of these specific classes has their own individual force of gravity. So Earth has 9.8, the Moon has 1.6, the Mars has 3.7, and the way I would call this now is I would do gravity : Earth.new. Let's actually make all of these readers.
What's the point of that? Getting.
I'll show you in a second.
Speaking of some new instance of Earth.
A second. Let's, real quick, let me just print all these to make sure that this actually comes out correctly. Cool. All right. So again, the idea is like there's multiple ways of writing code. Like not one way is necessarily better than the other. So a lot of times, should we jump into this now? No, we'll jump into it later. The idea is kind of like if I have gravity by itself, right? Gravity by itself is ambiguous because you're not sure if you're talking about the gravity here on Earth or on other planets. Similarly, if you were to say, like, if you had a program, you're writing stuff for a bank, and you just say account. Account is way too ambiguous, especially for an organization that uses many different types of accounts. Is it this person's savings account? Is this person's checking account or a CD or something like that? There's many different types of accounts. So you want to be far more specific with the naming of your things, your classes and things like that. So you could call this, if you didn't have this as a module, you can have it as like Earth gravity or moon gravity, and this is totally fine. This makes sense to a lot of people. Just seeing Earth gravity like this, I know exactly what this class is going to do. I know what methods it's going to contain. I know what attributes it's going to have. This is totally fine. What I'm demonstrating here is that this is just another way of doing things. And you might see it in some of the code that, some of the Ruby code that you see online. You might see it in some of the Ruby code when you're running things like CSV row. Like what was, like before today, what was this? Like nobody really knew. So we're just trying to teach that.
So does this have anything to do with like the speed of a program or anything like that, or it's purely architectural?
This has absolutely nothing to do with the speed of a program, as far as I know. This is just for naming conventions. Like, how do I name things well? It has very little to do with speed. Yep.
For this example, we we translated this to like thinking about ice cream, like the whole ice cream example.
Yeah.
If I had like a module of ice cream or a module of desserts,
Yes.
and then I had like ice cream class, cake class, or like gelato class.
Sure.
Like, would that make sense architecturally?
I personally, it depends on what you're trying to do. So just for that particular example, let's see dessert.rb. I'll just do 2 for now. The way I would call this is dessert ice cream.new or something like that, and then dessert cake.new. This would work. I mean, most of the time it's kind of the big question you have to ask yourself when it comes to this is why. Like, why am I doing this? It's not an especially popular way to name your variables, but it does happen quite a bit depending on where you go. For most cases, I would just do ice cream.new because there's no real benefit other than that. But when we're talking about things like, let's say you're at a like a diner. On the East Coast, there's a lot of diners. They're open 24/7, and their menus are 70 pages long. There's hundreds and hundreds of items on the menu, and you can have dessert in many. You can have ice cream in many contexts, right? You could have it as a float, as like a drink. You could have it as a dessert standing alone. You could have it as on top of a pancake, and that could be a full meal, right? So it's kind of like, what context are you using your ice cream? So in that case, it's like that. If I'm just talking about the dessert version of ice cream, like I'm eating it just as a dessert, I'm not eating it as a part of a float or part of a like a pancake meal or something like that, then that's when I would use something like this. So again, when we have these modules, the main benefit, one of the main benefits we get is something called namespacing. Namespacing being just the way that I organize the code. I could have moon gravity and Mars gravity without the module, or I can just have it as gravity : Earth. And then this operates by itself, but it's namespaced under the module of gravity. This is not an especially popular way of doing things, but I just wanted to introduce that to you. The more popular way of doing things is actually for Alex's answer to us. And what was the, can you just go over that one more time?
Yeah, I wanted some functions for Sudoku that I could just call like get row without having to call like a class instance. So I just made something, just like a module like he did with a bunch of functions that took in parameters and didn't include module at the top of my other page. And I could just call get row with the like board and the box number in it.
Yeah, that's right. So the idea behind the more popular way of using modules is it's also called a mix-in, which is basically a module is just a container. It has a bunch of stuff inside of it, and I'm just going to mix it into one specific class. I think it'll make more sense when we show a few examples. So this is going to be a little bit more interactive. Give me some attributes to a person. Give me 3 attributes to any person. Everyone has this. Go ahead. Name. I'll just go first name for now. What else? Height and birthday. All right, I'm going to make all of those instance variables. Yeah, I'm going to make all of those readers. All right. Now give me 2 things that every single human is able to do. Eat. In some way or another, every human has the ability to consume food. Eat. All right. And what? And breathe. Sure. Yeah. Now let's say I have a person, a local variable of person equal to person.new. I'm going to say it's John. This person is 71 inches tall and born on Feb 17. All right, this person has the ability to eat and to breathe. So if all goes well, I'm able to say like person.new, create the new person. They're able to eat and they're able to breathe. And we'll create one more method down here called tell me about yourself. And I'll say, hi, my name is first name. I am height inches tall, and my birthday is birthday. All right, if all goes well, we'll see all of this pop up. Let's see what happens. Close this. All right, let's run Ruby person.rb, and all of these things come out. So everybody has the ability to eat, yum. Everyone has the ability to breathe, and then everyone has the ability to tell me about yourself. Now, these are things that are all common to this class person. But there are things that teenagers do specifically that adults and people do not do in general. I don't consider teenagers people sometimes during those formative years. What are some things that teenagers are able to do that the class person is not able to do? Yeah. Like what is something that's specific only to a teenager?
Get away with more.
Get away with murder.
They're able to get away with things. What is, like, I guess, how do you have a tantrum? Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, that also applies to adults too. But like, there's
Are you talking like consequences? Like,
no, I'm just saying like these are just more meant to be funny. There's like when you're an adult, you do certain things that like you can forgive teenagers for doing certain things because they're teenagers, like giving a ton of sass, or like giving a ton of sass, or like maybe like screaming like I don't love you to your parents, right? Because that's something that like teenagers do, but you might not do as there's a less likely chance that you're going to do that as an adult. But there's things that teenagers do. So get away with things, have a tantrum, maybe give sass in a teenager way. One more thing. Anything else? Skip school. Yeah, why not? So I have this.
You like ditch, right?
Yeah.
You ditch work as an adult.
Oh, that's true. Ditch without consequence. So I have a class person. This class person has certain, this is like object-oriented programming here. So a person, like an instance of the person class has a first name, a height, and a birthday. They're able to do human things like eat and breathe. Teenagers are also part of the human class, but they have specific things that they're able to do that most people are not able to do. Things like getting away with things, having tantrums and people understand, giving sass in a teenager kind of way, ditching without consequence. Another one is like eating without a ton of consequences. Like when you were a teenager, you were able to eat far more than you're able to eat now, and without as much consequences as you get older, your metabolism slows down. I'm going to have eat without consequence. Or you're able to, like, when you were a teenager and you decided to go drinking in your parents' basement or something like that, you can wake up, you can go drink quite a bit and then wake up the next morning and be okay. Whereas right now, if you're much older and you have 10 drinks, the next morning you feel like death, because that's just what happens when your body gets older. So we're going to make some of these things that teenagers can do into a module, because it's not a class by itself. It's things that you can mix in to other classes.
But what about, so like I thought you can do a class teenager and then do the caret symbol.
Oh, you mean like class teenager inherits from person?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do something like this.
Is that where this is going?
No, it's not.
Can a class inherit from a module?
Can a class inherit from a module?
Can you build certain stuff inside of a module, like put it in a class, like initialize that? You like initialize a module by itself.
Can I initialize a module by itself? I think we'll answer that just in just a little bit. So a teenager, let's say we have a module called teenager. This doesn't have an initialize because it's not a class. It's just a collection. It's just a bucket of methods that it can do. Let's say I have a eat without consequence. Yum, I can eat more than my adult counterparts. And then let's just do give sass. Ugh, whatever. All right, we think about like high school versions of ourselves or something. We had a little bit more sass than we do now. Ugh, whatever. And you can do the hair flip or whatever. That's stuff that's specifically like more likely than not teenagers are able to do. Now, this is just a module. Again, it's just a container with a bunch of stuff inside of it. And our bunch of stuff is, for us, is just a bunch of methods. Now, if I wanted to bring this into the person class, let's say I wanted to have p person give sass. So again, I have this class person here. It doesn't have this method called give sass. So when I run it here, it goes through everything and it blows up on line 27. It says there's an undefined method called give sass because most people don't know how to give sass very well. However, let's say that I wanted to bring in all of the things that a teenager can bring in. Let's say that you have a child, they're not able to give sass, but all of a sudden they hit 11 and 12 and suddenly they're able to give sass. So because I need to require relative to get this file in here, relative, teenager. So I'm going to bring in the file and then I'm going to run this one more time. Same issue, there's no method called give sass quite yet. So first things first, I'm going to bring in the file, and then right after the class person, before adder, reader, or anything else, I'm just going to do include, and then whatever the name of the module is. By having this include whatever the module is, I'm basically bringing all of its contents into this class in a very quick way. Instead of copying and pasting directly into here, I can just grab it, all of the methods, and with this one line, include teenager, it brings in all of this stuff inside of here. So if I run this one more time, hopefully I won't get this large error message on line 29, but I can actually say, ugh, whatever. So it's basically, again, a module is just like also known as a mixin. It's a bucket of stuff.
That is just another way to inherit.
It's not inheritance at all. This is just again, it's just a bucket of stuff. I'm not inheriting anything. What's that? Exactly, that's pretty much it, yeah. So the idea is like So
you still have to be required relative and include.
The require relative is required no matter what, mostly because it's a file. The include is the key thing here, which is basically I'm including all of the things inside this module teenager, meaning these two methods I'm bringing inside of here.
So if you call teenager a class,
it's not a class. Oh, are you saying if I call it?
Okay. If you called it a class, you wouldn't be able to call one of the modules, sorry, one of the methods teenager while you're a class person?
I mean, if I did this,
yeah,
and then I did include teenager here, I've never tried this. We'll find out. Yep. It says wrong argument type class expected module. So whenever I have this include, it has to be a module instead of a class.
So you can't call method. You can't from one class. You can't call a method from another class.
I can. In my case here, I would have to like create a new method. We'll just call this give teenage sass, and then I would have to do teenager.new.give sass here.
Is there a way to store variables in modules?
Give me 1 second. What was your question?
Is there a way to store variables in modules?
So so that's actually a great segue into the next point. When you're dealing with modules, you want to avoid dependencies as much as possible. And what I mean by that is if you take a look inside of teenager, you can see that it doesn't depend on anything else. Meaning if I create another class, let's call it like high schooler, RB. Yes, high schooler. So I've got these 3 classes here, and you can kind of see inside this module teenager right here, it doesn't rely on anything. There's no variables of any type, right? Meaning that this can be mixed in anywhere. I don't need to know anything ahead of time. All I need to do is just mix it in. I can use it in the person right down here where I can say like, give me sass. Give sass is not a method on the person, but because I've included it in the teenager module, I can just take a look at here. Okay, there's a give sass method. So if I run the person, let's do run Ruby person, whatever is the give sass method. If I were to want to bring it into a high schoolers definitely can give sass. I can just import and include this teenager module again, and I can write give sass. Whatever. So the point I'm trying to make is whenever you have a module, you want to make sure there are no dependencies. Yes, you can use variables inside of there, but you have to make sure that wherever you include it, that variable is also available. So let's say that I wanted to eat without consequence. And inside of eat without consequence, my weight is still weight. Now I have a variable inside of this module, meaning that wherever I import and include this module, I need to make sure that weight is a method that's available. So if I use it on person here, and I say like I'm going to, say do p person.eat without consequence, I can actually run it on this person. Eat without consequence.
You make that.
Yeah, that's my mistake. I don't have a weight. Let's just do weight. I am whatever. Okay. So you can kind of see when I run Ruby person, and I tell this person to eat without consequence. Eat without consequence is not on this class called person, but it's inside the teenager module, eat without consequence. Now, again,
teenager at the top.
Because I did include teenager at the top. So all of this content is also dragged inside of this class person. Now, I want to avoid using variables as much as possible because even though it worked over here, because it had weight as an adder reader, it won't work inside of high schooler over here. So PH eat without consequence. So if I call it inside of high schooler, it's going to say, okay, I don't have a method inside class called eat without consequence, but because I have include teenager, I bet eat without consequences inside of the teenager module. And it is, it's right here. But it's going to read to the point where it says, wait. Like, what is wait? Wait is not included in here at all. So it's going to blow up.
You just have to remember to include.
What's that?
I mean, yeah, you just have to remember to include person on that middle node, right?
Inherit person, teenager or something.
So we're module teenagers. Can't you just do include person?
It does not work the other way around. Like this?
Yeah.
It does not go the other way around. Because a high schooler, like, when you create a high schooler, that example, they also have a weight, but a weight is not inherently on high schooler.
So module is going to be more general in practice, right? Like it would be more general methods, whereas with the class you have your more specific methods that apply.
That's 100% correct. Yeah. So module is just it's just a container, has a bunch of methods inside of it. Those methods are general enough to go into many different classes. When you're talking about a specific class, those have specific methods and specific attributes on that specific class.
Let's say there were like variables or something that you wanted globally. Do you have to store them inside of a method within the module, or could you actually store them?
One more time, what was the question?
Like, let's say you have some global variable that you want accessible in all your other classes. I don't know, something that's common to, like, I don't know, shoes or whatever. Shoes, like as a variable in the module. How do you store that without making another definition?
So you want to avoid using global variables if at all possible, mostly because there are very few things, well, practically there are very few things that you would want globally across everything. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. So you pretty much never want to do it that way. But in the case that you actually did want to have a global variable, I guess
I mean, not like a global, but I mean just like something that's available wherever you include the
module. You mean like if I did like def weight here?
I mean, not like another method, like something you could call like.
You initialize.
Oh, so it's kind of like whenever I call teenage, so like whenever I create a person and I have like the instance variable first name, I can access first name inside of this particular instance.
Sure.
So the idea is, can I have a module teenager with like a variable that could be passed in between different classes because it's already there? No. Okay. Let me pause here and we'll kind of pick up a little later.